Okay, well, welcome to tonight's discussion. We've got people joining us. We're getting the screen set up here again, but welcome to the people on Zoom. We've got people watching on Zoom tonight and people here in person. So my name is Nate Olson. I'm the interim director of the KIE Institute of Ethics. Excited for tonight's discussion, solar farms, community, and ecology. So we have a great group of panelists with us tonight, and they'll each talk about their area of expertise on this topic, and then we're going to open it up to questions. But first, I wanted to say a few things to get things started with it. So first, thank you for coming this evening. I'm glad to have you here. The topic for tonight's discussion, important topic for the present and the future in Kern County. This week, there's this event happening. As many of you know, there's also on Friday a CERC symposium, the California Energy Research Center. And as is going to be discussed in Friday's symposium, Kern County is an emerging national leader in energy innovation. As the only comprehensive university in the South Valley too, CSUB is well positioned to analyze all dimensions of energy innovation. The technical symposium on Friday is the title is the CERC Carbon Management and Energy Innovation Technical Symposium. Will feature many excellent presentations about the science of energy innovation. With the KIE Institute of Ethics, we're committed to discussing its ethical, political, social dimensions, which is what tonight's discussion is about. Specifically, we're focusing tonight on large-scale solar projects. So the eastern desert regions of Kern County are home to some of the largest large-scale solar projects in the nation, I believe actually in the world in some cases, of the large-scale solar projects. Solar is a renewable resource, has a very low carbon footprint, supplying an increasing percentage of our energy needs. Like any energy source, though, there are environmental justice questions or issues to address. Tonight, you'll learn about environmental impacts and steps being taken to minimize environmental impacts. And we'll also discuss community. That's one other dimension of our conversation this evening. How to ensure our local communities effectively participate in energy and in environmental decision-making, and how to make sure that risks and benefits of new energy development are equitably distributed. So we'll hear from our expert panelists, but this is a community conversation. So I hope to hear from you too in the Q&A portion. So after each panelist will present for about 10 minutes or so, we'll open it up to Q&A. And so if you're here in person, we have microphones you could come to ask questions. And if you're on Zoom, there's the Q&A portion of your Zoom where you can submit questions in the Q&A at any point, and then I'll read those questions and address them to the panelists in our Q&A portion. So we're also recording tonight's event, and it'll be up on our KIE Institute of Ethics YouTube page within the next few days. So if you'd like to share with your students then, or see it at that point, you can also go on the KIE Institute of Ethics YouTube page. Okay, so a couple before I introduce the panelists' acknowledgements, I want to acknowledge the California Energy Research Center and their interim director, Dr. Tony Rathburn, who's spending the year in Australia this year, maybe watching there at this point, doing research there. He's been a great collaborator of organizing this event, as well as Dr. Leo Song, who's the main organizer of the CERC symposium. And I want to mention too that if you go to their website, csub.edu/CERC, you can register to participate in their symposium on Friday online. You'll find a link there if you go to the symposium page. In-person attendance is limited, but anyone can go on and attend virtually on Friday. I'd like to thank Kegley Institute sponsors, including Valley Strong Credit Union and the Kegley family, who helped make all of our events possible, and Linda Parker, who helped organize this event, is a local solar guru. So I appreciate her organizational support for the event as well. Okay, so I'm very happy to introduce our panelists for tonight's event. So first, Mr. Devon Muto, who's a vice president of development responsible for overseeing the development on EDF Renewables utility scale projects in their West region. Since joining EDF Renewables in 2018, he has assisted with advancing over 2 gigawatts of projects to construction while also supporting a pipeline to continue production in the coming years. Mr. Muto currently sits on the Renewable Energy Wildlife Institute Board of Directors and Renewable Energy Wildlife Research Fund Advisory Committee. And he's also a member of the Avian Solar Work Group. Prior to joining EDF Renewables, Mr. Muto's 20-plus year career covered several roles in the field of planning and environmental policy, including Chief of Advanced Planning for the County of San Diego Branch Manager for ICF Consulting, and Project Manager for Planning and Environmental Services on several large-scale utility contracts and public projects. Welcome to CSUB. Glad to have you here. Our next panelist, no stranger to CSUB, Dr. Antje Lauer, is a professor of biology here at CSUB. She's been a faculty member here since 2007. She also serves as CSUB's faculty sustainability coordinator, and she's been instrumental in sustainability efforts on campus, including the creation of CSUB's Sustainability Symposium. That's a lot of S's, like I need some more water with. Actually 2 weeks from now, a little more than 2 weeks from now, April 26th is the 3rd now annual Sustainability Symposium.
And you're all invited.
Yes, so hope you were able to come to that on April 26th coming up. Dr. Lauer received her PhD in microbiology from the Institute for Marine Sciences in Kiel, Germany, and before coming to CSUB, held postdoctoral researcher positions at James Madison University, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the Institute for Chemistry and Biology of the Marine Environment in Germany. Much of her research has focused on valley fever. Indeed, she's a leading expert on the microbiology of valley fever with more publications than I could list here. More recently, Dr. Lauer has focused on topics of environmental justice and restoration. And then finally, we have Emma De La Rosa. She's a regional policy manager focusing on Tulare and Kern counties with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Ms. De La Rosa holds a BA in sociology from UC Merced and a Master of Public Policy from Cal Poly SLO. At Leadership Council, Ms. De La Rosa works alongside residents throughout Tulare and Kern counties to advocate for environmental justice policies, protect vulnerable and frontline communities from pollution exposure, climate change impacts, and also advocate for public participation and meaningful engagement in decision processes. So you can see we have an excellent panel of people tonight. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from them. Welcome also to CSUB, Ms. De La Rosa. Glad to have you here. So first, Devon, start us off here. Join me in welcoming Devon to podium.
All right, well, thank you for having me here today. Again, my name is Devon Muto. I'm with EDF Renewables, and I've got a brief presentation that I'll try to go here pretty quickly. All right, so EDF Renewables is an international company. We do everything clean energy. Today, we're primarily talking about solar, but note that there's a number of other ways that we are continuing to support the clean energy transition, and EDF Renewables supports all those different technologies and implementing them across the region. So at EDF Renewables, we're actually broken into a few different groups. I'm with the Grid Scale Power company, which Grid Scale Power part of the company, which essentially does 100 megawatts and larger projects. There's also Distributed Scale Power, which does the smaller projects. They also do community scale projects. And then we all have our on-site solution, our EV chargers, rooftop solar. And then ultimately we have our asset optimization, which actually operates all the facility. The reason I point this all out is that we work on every aspect of the clean energy economy, and it really is not just a single solution that we have to be working on. It takes all of these different aspects of producing clean energy, bringing them to the grid, bringing it to our homes and businesses to get to ultimately our goals, completely transitioning to an energy and fighting climate. So EDF stands for Electricité de France. That's our parent company, but don't let that fool you. We are actually in North America, one of the oldest renewable energy and largest renewable energy that there are. We began back in the 80s as a company that maintenance on wind farms, and then we've grown out of that. We are now headquartered in San Diego. That's actually where I live and work. And we have a number of projects throughout California, most of which are shown on here. We have over 2 gigawatts just in California. They're actually currently owned by EDF that we're operating. And over the next 3 years, we plan to bring on at least 3 other projects in California, and those are listed here. One of them you see is Bullhead, Kern County, that I'll be talking about. So within Kern County, we actually have 5 solar and wind projects that we own and operate. These are all down in the Antelope Valley area, just northwest of Rosamond, the community of Rosamond. These projects have occurred over the last decade, and they've supported hundreds of local jobs, along with a number of capital investment payments and revenue into the county and the local. They include Pacific Wind, which is kind of the larger area that you've shown here, just because the wind project covers a larger expanse of land. Our Catalina solar projects, our Valentine and Big Bow projects, and then most recently, our big Bullhead solar project was just approved in March by supervisors, and we hope to bring that online in 2020. That's the one to come, but the other ones are the ones that we have out there that are currently on. I will come back to this map to talk a little bit more about the siting that went into all these projects. But just because Bullhead was just approved, I wanted to take a little bit more time to talk about that. But before that, because of the longstanding relationship we now have with the community down in Antelope Valley, we've continued to interact with the community, demonstrate our support through a number of different ways. So here's a list of various organizations and events that we participated in recently. We even have several others that go well beyond this, but we've continued to look for communities that are community groups that we can participate with, ways that we give back to the community, ways that we can continue to support a local. So our Bullhead Solar project, which was recently approved, is a 270 megawatt project with a 2026 COD. That's the commercial operations date, renewable energy terms. It is also paired with batteries, so we could potentially have up to another 270 megawatts of batteries or storage capacity. And it is on approximately 1,350 acres of private land. We have 2 possible interconnection points to the grid that we're looking at. One is the Rosamond switch station, which is WP interconnection point, and the other one is a Whirlwind substation, is Southern California Edison ISO operated interconnection point. That gives us a lot of optionality on how we deliver the energy to the grid and what service that it will be serving. We went through a lot of effort to minimize the impacts on this project. The first and foremost is that we have developed it as part of this complex that you saw on the prior slide, using existing infrastructure that we have already with other projects, using some of the land that we have with our other projects. And so we've capitalized on. We also located the majority of the site on disturbed and fallow land, something that's not always available, but we were able to find fallow land space that was former agricultural land and out of agricultural production. So that's the vast majority for this. We've, over the several years that we've been implementing projects, we've also learned from that and how we can do lower impact construction. So we're now grading in a manner that retains more vegetation, more root balls, and minimizes dust. And what we've seen is that actually encourages growth on the sites. So we're planning on doing that on this project. We've also developed an open fencing plan, which allows for wildlife to return back onto solar sites once they're in operation. And we're also committed to other projects mitigation as we coordinate with the county and also with W appropriate. As part of our projects, there come a lot of benefits as well to the community. We do build our projects using union labor. This project will have a project labor agreement. At its peak, we'll have over 600 jobs. And it's a pretty substantial workforce. You see out there, an average of 200 workers a day. So it can get a lot of activity. And all that activity brings those workers to the community. They are purchasing, they're buying other materials there, they're visiting the businesses. So it's a lot of additional revenue and activity for the community. In addition, we coordinate with the county, and the county assesses different service charges and fees on us. Currently, the current county is implementing a impact charge that is supplementing property tax exclusion that applies to solar projects in the state of California. So that's additional revenue that comes to the county. And we also pay the normal sales tax, property tax. And in this case, we have a franchise route, so it will be county. So a number of different revenue sources for the county government. And this is all working together and supporting our goals, not only as local community, as the state, as the nation, towards renewable energy generation and continuing to be a leader. So as I mentioned, I wanted to wrap up by going back to our overall footprint here in Antelope Valley and how we came to siting the project. I listed some of the major factors that go into siting. There's obviously a lot more, but just to hit on some of the big ones. So the first is proximity to load. One of the reasons that we're here in the Antelope Valley is proximity to Los Angeles. You look at, a very high level view and satellite, you can really see Los Angeles Basin, which is essentially all urbanized, surrounded by a ring of mountains. When you go beyond those mountains, you start getting some flatter desert land. That's where we are with Antelope. That's kind of your first opportunity for large scale generation of solar that's going to support that large center. And that's one of the prime why we're out in this. The other reason is that there's available transmission. So we need to be able to produce and actually get it onto transmission lines that are going to send it to the area. Use them. Within this area, there's been a lot of investment in transmission. And so that allows us to actually produce the energy. We have to look at land availability and suitability, ownerships. Yeah. Need to have local support. So we can't get these projects done without the support of the decision makers, without the support of the communities. And then right, no problem. All right. We balance our resources already in roads and routing of our traffic. And so we're always looking for other feedback on how we better integrate our. And lastly, we have project economics. So everything that we have to agree to also has to work at the end from an economical standpoint. Ultimately, our projects are delivering power that's being bought by the ratepayers, being bought by you, the public, but we need to keep our rates low. So much as we'd like to continue also doing all these other things that give back to the community, support environmental conservation, build out more infrastructure, provide more revenue to local governments. We also have to balance that with a competitive price that's going to keep rates down and energy, especially solar energy, competitive with the other energy sources and still support the transition to clean energy. And with that, I think that wraps up my part. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Let me see.
Yeah, I get you.
So, good evening, everybody. So Dr. Olson already introduced me. So I'm not an expert on solar panels. I'm not working for renewable energy companies. I just got interested in the topic, and that was why I was invited here to speak to you. So why am I interested in the topic? So as you heard, my main research topic is valley fever. And for many years, I have been working together with public health officials, with people from air quality monitoring districts about valley fever, how to educate the public, causes of valley fever, why do we see an increase? And I visited quite a bit the Mojave Desert, which became one of my sampling sites. So I realized personally of how much dust is in the air. And I didn't really thought a lot of it beginning when I visited the area 10 years ago, 15 years ago when I started here. But since then, you know, I became more and more aware what the main reasons are for the increasing dust in the area. And by listening to Devon, it seems actually that EDF is one of the better environmental aware solar companies out there. So I have actually worked with some others which were like the opposite, to say it mildly. So how did I get interested in it? So I told you that this is my sampling site, among others, and I visited often. And I got a call like 2 years ago from a nurse who works at Edwards Air Force Base. And she said, we have to do something about it. Valley fever is increasing here. I'm a nurse. The soldiers are getting sick, people that are training. There are increased incidence in valley fever. The dust is horrible. So, and in addition, they want to build a large solar ranch near Boron, right in the neighborhood of it, right close to an elementary school. And it will be like, I forgot how many acres it was, but large. I can look it up. I have some notes here. But I said, okay, we can investigate. And I didn't know that person. She actually asked me to come and collect some samples and analyze for valley fever, because nobody from the Kern County Board of Supervisors, from the Kern County Department of Planning and Resources were interested in investigating how bad it actually is before you disturb the soils. So nobody had any idea. So we just know valley fever is around, but is this maybe a hotspot? Is this an area that we don't really need to worry about? Maybe that was former agricultural field, so the microbial diversity switched. Nobody knew anything about it and was even not information that was not even needed, apparently. And the nurse told me that she had spoken in front of the Kern County Board of Supervisors, and all her concerns were actually basically shut down. So she wasn't listened to. So talking with the community is often emphasized that this is being done, but concerns that the community bring forward are rarely considered. So I went out there and I got more familiar with the entire situation. And it was not just valley fever, it was also that part of this project would actually require that 4,500 Joshua trees would have to be cut, and many of them more than 100 years old, because this was pristine desert land. So this was the Aratina solar power plant. With that one, the Aratina one, which was delayed in construction, but they started, I think, this year. So 4,500. And I went out in that area and I saw how many majestic Joshua trees were out there. There's also the struggle to get the Joshua tree listed as an endangered species. So right now it's only a candidate, which makes it somehow protected. So you cannot just chop it down, but it's rarely enforced. And it's not the status that would permanently protect it. And it's recognized as a species that is also negatively impacted by climate change. So it's not considered as an endangered species yet, it's just a candidate. So this is just one of the species that is out there. There are others like pit foxes, there's the desert tortoises, these are all endangered species. And the more we build in these native environments, the more we lose those kind of species. But this is not the only thing. The other thing was I actually looked up the soil quality and if it's suitable for building. So by characterizing my sampling sites, I always look at the USDA Web Soil Survey database and look what kind of type of soil it is. And the site for the Aratina solar power plant was actually considered as not suitable for development because it is highly erosive. And I looked up the predicted data and it would be like more than 200 tons per acre per year that would be eroded and blown away. So even if there are ambitions to put plants back in space, you know, most of the surface soil would already have been blown away. So which kind of plants can actually thrive there when the surface soil has been basically blown away? And I looked at data that showed that valley fever increased in northern Los Angeles County, which is valley area, in San Bernardino County, and also in eastern Kern County. And the numbers are actually through the roof. And the only thing that also increased during that time is building, construction. And not just solar ranches, also like urban sprawl. Don't want to blame everything on solar because we need to also go away from oil. And I see the need that we need to have alternative energy. So we are here in a dilemma. And I'm also looking into maybe getting solar for my house. So it's not that I don't like solar at all. I really appreciate it. But it has to be done in the right way. And as I said, I'm not an expert for this. But you know, there should be better ways to develop solar. So I would argue for using not pristine desert land to actually put new solar ranches out there. Why not using land that is abandoned from farmers because there's no water anymore, or put a lot of solar panels on roofs? You know, this could be done. And then Emma de la Rosa will later speak about social justice because the people from Boron also told me that they don't benefit from any of those multi-million dollars that come in from this Aratina solar power plant. That will all go, the energy will all go to Monterey County, to the Silicon Valley. They will not get anything from it. They might get peanuts, like another dollar store where they can get cheap food, nothing of value for the community. And by having all these solar plants around them, there is also no space for boron to maybe grow. There's no space left, you know? So this is like all concerning, but from my perspective, it's like the valley fever is out of the roof. People are coming to Kern County, northern Los Angeles County, because it's cheap land. People want to build a house there, raise a family there, and they don't know what they actually get their family into. They grew up somewhere else. They have not obtained immunity to valley fever. They come here, maybe even want to retire and then get exposed to all the dust. And the further you go in the Mojave Desert, you go to the east, the more valley fever spores you have in the air and the more soils are becoming positive for valley fever. So this is a real concern. So companies are usually preparing an environmental impact report, right? And there's dust mitigation in there. So they have to moisten the soil, that the workers are not being exposed to dust that much. But often, you know, when the work is done or over the weekend, when it's hot, the soil dries up and spores that are in there are going into the air, blowing into the neighborhood. And even the watering the soil is contradictory because it creates a mini rainy season for microbes to grow. So even if that site was maybe not a hotspot for valley fever, it might become one because you water it. Yeah, so and it's never investigated. And all these mitigation methods are not really controlled and are not really enforced. Maybe you're an exception, but the Aratina power plant probably not, and many others also not really. So also the Kern County Board of Supervisors, they are not interested in delaying any development because they see the big money coming in. But then when they really get all the money, then we maybe should make sure that those people that are negatively affected should benefit from these developments, right? And that is not the case. And what about the value of pristine desert land and all the species that live there? So when you go to the desert in the summer, you might think, oh my God, this is like worthless land, all looks dead, nothing really to thrive here. People throw trash there. It looks really not inviting. And then people who don't value nature and don't know about that animals are dormant, they are not dormant, plants are dormant, but animals, they are kind of hovering in the shades or underground and coming out in the night. And if you would go into the desert in the night, you would see all the species, but nobody does that. So it's the value of biodiversity that is often lacking among those decision makers that just wave all the development, more development brings more money. But seeing it from a sustainability perspective, yes, it brings money short term, but what about long term? What's happening to our unique land? California is a biodiversity hotspot. Maybe not anymore if we build it everywhere. Yeah, and I think I have needed my 10 minutes, right? So we can the word now to Emma. And then if you have any questions later or discussion points, I'm happy. Yeah, I was? Okay.
I might need some help with timekeeping, so let me know. Good evening, everyone. Emma de la Rosa, Regional Policy Manager with Leadership Council. As mentioned earlier, I work in Tulare and Kern counties. I will preface by saying that we have not worked in communities near Mojave area, but we have worked in other communities throughout the Central Valley that have faced some large-scale solar projects, and also the work that we do, as mentioned earlier, does prioritize community interests and protects community interests. So we do work alongside some of the most impacted communities to advocate for sound policy, to eradicate injustice, and secure equal access to opportunity, regardless of race, wealth, income, and place. Our guiding principles include increasing access to decision-making and supporting and uplifting community priorities, as mentioned, and supporting community power and co-powerment. One of the reasons why it's so important to engage communities in projects such as solar is because residents who live in these communities are the experts of their communities, and only they can tell you what kind of issues they're already facing or what kind of mitigation measures would be needed to ensure that the project won't have a long-lasting impact in their community. So I really appreciate going third because I'm able to, build off of what was already said. And so I do want to set the stage, though, to think about the communities that we work in. We work in rural communities, oftentimes unincorporated from cities who lack infrastructure. These communities don't have sidewalks, oftentimes don't have the proper lighting or stormwater systems. Sometimes folks don't have access to clean and affordable drinking water or wastewater services, and also face various housing issues due to the housing habitability and conditions, right? And that's really important to think about, because as we think about bringing in these large-scale solar projects and any other renewable energy projects, you have to think about where the current community conditions and how the impacts will impact that community, right? So while some of us may think that disrupting the soil will be fine because we all have really great insulation in our homes and we have really great air conditioning systems in our home, a lot of the communities in rural areas don't, right? And so it's really important to think about that starting off. Also want to mention that when it comes to solar projects, it's really important to prioritize solar projects that will bring a benefit to community, as Dr. Lauer had already mentioned. Solar projects can be beneficial in providing that community solar to offset some of those energy costs, but also it can be used to offset costs related to water rates. We work in communities where we are hearing utility districts say that the reason why they have to increase rates is because of the the high cost of energy, right? When we think about rural communities and their access to water, a lot of times these communities are already facing depleted water availability. And it does require these systems to have to overpump, or it does require them to work harder than most wells have to, right? And so that does lead into higher costs to the utility district, and consequently to the to ratepayers. So those are some of the two areas where community solar projects would be beneficial. But in doing that and looking at other types of solar projects, it's really important to ensure that the community engagement is happening and is supported through local jurisdictions and project proponents. I have some pretty good experience looking at municipal codes, and currently a lot of these municipal codes rarely require any type of or require extensive and robust community engagement. Usually what they require is a notice via mail if you live within 1,000 feet from the site. And if it's more than maybe 1,000 residents, I think they have to post like a large sign right outside of the site. It's municipal codes don't require this information to be provided in Spanish or in various languages. So we are already excluding communities who don't speak English from participating in these decision-making processes. And so it's really important for local governments, city of Bakersfield, Kern County, to update their municipal codes to ensure that public participation is actually going to occur and that it's going to be done in a meaningful way. There's sometimes when EIRs are provided, the mitigation measures have already been identified and there really isn't any type of consultation happening within communities and the project proponents. And that defeats the purpose. There needs to be consultation happening with community from the very start through the development of the EIR and the implementation of the project. And speaking about mitigation measures, oftentimes mitigation measures tend to not be specific and enforceable, which is a huge issue and really, goes against CEQA law. And so we do recommend that mitigation measures are not only reflective of community priorities and will reduce the impact to the community, but also that they are specific, that there are clear timelines, and that they are enforceable. Sorry, I'm just taking a quick look at my notes. When thinking about environmental impact reports, it's really important to assess the groundwater contamination. Again, echoing what Dr. Lauer mentioned, if you're using the water to ensure that there isn't a lot of dust created, you're already using maybe water that isn't available for communities, but also bringing in different types of chemicals or whatnot that into the groundwater, especially even after installation of the panels, there could be a risk of chemicals seeping into the ground. And it's really important that that risk is assessed, even if it's minimal, right? You should assess it. Air quality impact should also be assessed, not only for the operation and application, sorry, the construction, implementation of the project, but also throughout the entirety of the project to ensure that there won't be any impacts to community. Another thing to think about when it comes to solar projects is the heat island effect. A lot of these communities, like I mentioned, don't have access to air conditioning units or proper insulation and face a lot of housing habitability problems. And if these solar projects are placed near communities that already lack this infrastructure and it's creating a heat island effect, then that impact must be mitigated to ensure that residents are not overly impacted by that. And that does lead into fire hazards. If there are any fire hazards that can be associated with solar projects, those two must be assessed and in compliance with state codes and local hazard mitigation plans. Oftentimes we see that there are that projects do have an emergency response plan, but it's never communicated with community or it's never done with community, right? And that's already a big issue as well. The emergency response plans have to consider community. It has to consider communities' access to internet, right? What's the point of releasing a notification that there is, a risk of some type of fire hazard via email if residents don't have access to internet? So it's really important that the information that's relayed to the community is done in an accessible way. Lastly, again, echoing Dr. Lauer's comments about ensuring that the benefits do reach communities. If there's a solar project near an unincorporated rural community, yet the infrastructure is not there, it's not in place, the transmission lines are not in place, then where is the benefit going to, right? Who's actually receiving the benefit? We often speak about revenue coming into the county and, increasing the funding in the county's coffers, but sometimes the revenue doesn't even make its way to community, which is why we see a lot of communities still face lack of infrastructure in their neighborhoods. I mentioned ensuring the municipal codes should be updated and should support community participation, but also local government should comply with environmental justice policies and climate adaptation and resilience policies. Both city and the county has to comply with SB 1000, right? Which requires them to develop an environmental justice element, and SB 379, which requires them to update their safety element to include climate adaptation and resilience strategies. And I believe, if I'm not incorrect, that both the city and the county have not complied with those two. And it's really important that they do, to ensure that whatever type of future projects come into the community, they are already considering the environmental justice impacts and how these projects will build climate adaptation and a reliability in communities. And so I think I'll end it with that, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. And everyone's like right on the dot with like 10 minutes here. Like this never happens. People stay to their time. So, I'm getting the laptop here too, so I can take questions from people on Zoom. So if you have questions on Zoom, you're welcome to submit them on the Q&A function there, and I will be able to see them and address them to panelists. If you have questions here in the audience, welcome you to come to one of the microphones, then I'll know you've got a question and be able to call on you there. I have questions too for panelists that I maybe can start off with, but please, if you do have a question, stand and go to one of the microphones so I know that you have one, and on Zoom, you can submit it right here. So I wanted to start, Devon, with you, and so raise some, both Dr. Lauer, De La Rosa raised some points for you to think about. But I wonder maybe to start with, if you could just say more about what the environmental impact process looks like for you or for your organization. I think Dr. Lauer mentioned that perhaps use you as a model of ways to think about of how doing projects like this out in the desert, and say a bit more of what that kind of process looks like for you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. And I think I can probably also respond a little bit to
absolutely
what I heard from the panelists. But to start with our environmental impact process. So usually what we're doing when we're going out and we're siting, we're doing due diligence on the land. That includes environmental review. Most of our developers and our consultants are pretty knowledgeable of environmental issues. We also bring in specialists on the various potential resources that we might be encountering to make sure we're understanding them more. We're looking at, are there major conflicts? Are there issues that we can't overcome? Are there significant concerns? So we're doing that right out of the gate, even before we really engage even the local agency. Then we'll start looking at the laws and the regulations it has, and trying to, decide like what's the path that we're going to have to work through. And through all this, there's also an awareness that we're going to have to comply with the overarching environmental laws. And we're also going to have to go through CEQA, which is typically going to require us to prepare an environmental impact report. So we're kind of looking forward and trying to understand that process and what the outcome of that process is going to be. It's a difficult balance. I mean, it's not without, understanding that there's going to be impacts. And it's almost with every single one of these projects, there's going to be impacts, there's going to be mitigation. And so you're really looking at the sites. They're going to have the least amount of impacts, that you're going to be able to avoid the most sensitive sources. We stay away from areas where you have, the most sensitive species, where you get into areas where the mitigation is going to be so substantial that that it's not going to make the project economical. And so we use that to kind of gauge where we focus our development and plan for it. You start going through the process with the local government, with other agencies, with the community, and modify your project as appropriate.
Great. We do have a couple more questions here. So maybe, I know you have some other things too to say. Do you want to address a couple points? And
Yeah.
we can go to some other.
Yeah, maybe there were a number of great points raised by the other panelists. And so I think what the first reaction I had, other than things like those are really good concerns, is that I think we as an industry and even the local agencies like the county need to do a better job at communicating our process and the things that we're doing. Because I heard a lot of things in there about like maybe codes aren't being implemented, or certain things aren't being done, or it looks like developers aren't implementing certain measures. And I think when you're not included in the day-to-day process like I am, like I live this every day, you don't see everything that's being. So like on dust control, there's actually an agency that regulates dust control. There's their pollution district. And we're required to actually put dust monitors out on the site and monitor it on a daily basis. Actually, it's on like I think every so many minute basis. And if it exceeds a certain amount, then an alert goes out to all the agencies, including us, and to act on it. We also have like signs that are up that if you have any visible dust coming off your site, people can call a number and report you, and have inspectors come out and we have to deal with them. So there's actually a lot of regulation around dust. And we do a lot for that. Like Joshua Tree, actually, although it's just a candidate species, it's fully regulated as a list species right now. And last year, the state legislature passed the Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act, which protects the species. So there are protections in place, and what that's requiring us to do is actually obtain permits for any Joshua trees that we remove, and to pay a fee for every single tree that goes into a conservation fund that's looking at the long-term conservation of Joshua Tree. That's partially because it's being recognized that climate change is the threat to Joshua trees. And as the climate changes, what's going to happen is that the trees are actually going to migrate to higher elevations, in some cases even outside of the areas that we're currently developing solar. So we need to start to preserve those areas, that refugia for the species, in addition to assisting the species with expanding its range. It actually used to cover all of the desert Southwest, and the seeds of the Joshua tree were spread by the giant-toed sloth. And then when the sloths went extinct, then the seeds weren't spread as far, and that didn't allow it to be as nimble to changes in climate fluctuation. So now we actually have to help the species. There's a lot of thought and action and that's going in behind all of these projects, with a lot of care for the environment, for the community, and for all the resources. But that's probably not being made aware to everybody enough, and we probably need to do a better job at that as an industry.
Let's go to a couple questions here and then circle back to some of these points. So, Dean Rodriguez, would you like to?
My question, I want to connect some of the points the panelists made. And one is I'm curious about the Homestead Solar Project. It's 1,343 acres. And they're probably on, and is that land that the company leases or the company has purchased and is owned? That's so different. But then the second creation of jobs, that really sounds wonderful. Long term, so you have 600 altogether and about 200 at any one time. After the project is completed, how many jobs are there to maintain and operate? And then how many are kind of going to be in the local community versus like being monitored from a computer system in San Fernando? And then the last question that I have is I'm wondering, Antje, because you mentioned the uptick in valley fever cases, in terms of has there been any studies on the construction workers? Because we can see the community, you've said some things about how the community, but in terms of the construction workers, I'm assuming that they have, safety gear, or maybe I already forgot what number they are, even though we just, and so in the aftermath, is there any monitoring of those employees? Do you have any numbers? So that's it. I think I asked 3 questions. I think I took 3 bites of the apple instead of 1, but there.
It is land that we own, that we purchased. We actually prefer to lease, and so a lot of our projects are on leased land. But we do a mixture depending on the individual that owns the land and whether or not they're open for leasing or they want to sell it outright. So it just kind of depends. And we also look at federal land and other lands like that. There's not as much federal land in the Antelope Valley area, and so we haven't really targeted as much. But we do have a number of federal land projects elsewhere. With regards to the jobs, you're definitely accurate that the vast majority of the jobs are created during the construction process. And what we're seeing is that, if you look at the projections for solar energy demand and what we need to build over the next several decades, there's going to be continued demand for those workers. So what's happening is that they're going from project to project, so that and even in Kern County, there's so many projects that a lot of those workers can stay within Kern County and continue to be there. When it comes to operations, we actually have an operation facility in Rosamond, and we have, I believe it's 5 or 6 full-time employees that work there that are circulating through our different sites. So there isn't a high presence of operational folks there. And then we do have an operations center back in San Diego where we have the computers that we're monitoring stuff from as well. And then there are some, other connected jobs to those. I mean, those are our workers that are full-time, but there are other like technicians that may have to be called out to the site, or we have certain vendors, or there's other folks that need to come out and do different things on the sites as well. So there's some connected jobs, but really it's those, 5 to 6 people that are out there in the community.
Okay, you're talking a little bit about protection. So you mentioned the Mars. So what I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, when construction is being planned in an area where valley fever occurs, there's now a law that developers and construction companies have to educate the workers on valley fever. And they recommend that the people in the field wear N95 dust masks. But if you ever had been wearing an N95 dust mask, you will realize that you cannot wear that for a long time. It's actually recommended that you should only wear a mask like this. N95 means that 95% of the particles that are in the air are filtered out. So you're really breathing clean air. But you're not getting enough oxygen. So you get hypoxia. So if you have to work in the field and it's hot, imagine that, you wear the mask, you're not getting enough oxygen. So that's not healthy. So also by going into the field and looking when people work, almost nobody wears a mask. And then on top of it, the dust is also on the clothes. What are you doing with the clothes when you're done? Yeah. So also this is not enforced, but you can also not force people to wear the mask. It's impossible. So as a biologist and expert on valley fever, I actually tried to turn the wheel around a little bit. I started a company and I offered to test soils for valley fever. And I emailed and wrote letters to all those companies that had been fined by OSHA, like $100,000, $200,000, where there were lawsuits from workers. Nobody responded. Nobody was interested in it. I had this company for 2.5 years or so, and I finally shut it down because nobody cared. And, this is what I don't understand. If you're really concerned about the people, the community, the workers, you are a little more proactive. And I just looked at my notes, the area for the Aratina solar power plant, we took a little more than 30 samples for valley fever in different areas, different sections, and 22% of these soils were positive for valley fever. And if I wouldn't have analyzed that, nobody knows. I communicated this to the Kern County Department of Planning and Resources, nobody cares. And if Lorelei Oviatt is listening to this presentation, she's welcome to reach out to me.
environmental impacts you were mentioning and for local communities, for construction workers, the data that you have, I mean, so this is during the construction process, or does this linger the kind of
So that was
effects?
prior.
Or is it, are they ongoing kind of health potentially impacts for local communities or higher rates of valley fever over time?
Well, it depends if you let the vegetation regrow, to cover the bare soil. So when the soil is graded, you are creating a big hazard. But there are measures to minimize the hazard. It will never be zero, but you can minimize it. And there are great ideas. There are publications about how to do that, but this is costly.
Yeah, what are a couple of the things to minimize or things that we potentially could be thinking about?
You could look at the native vegetation that is there before you start grading, and you can try to keep those that are, let's say, not difficult to grow to invite back, but it requires people to let's say, baby those plants, because if you don't water them during the summer, they will not become reestablished again. It's impossible. You can also not just put seeds everywhere and hope that the plants will grow. That's not working. They actually tried this in the Antelope Valley. They put seeds from helicopters everywhere to mitigate dust problems. Nothing germinated. You have to have somebody who takes care of these plants until they are having roots that are deep enough or have stored enough water that they can overcome the dry season. And this is really costly and it's not required. And this is why nobody does that. It's not required. Testing for valley fever is not required. Revegetation is not required, maybe recommended. But if it comes to making profit, you only do what is required and you make maximum profit. You don't do the extra things. Nobody does that. Or maybe.
Yeah, Emma?
Yeah, I just want to add, I think, in addition to that, so, in reacting to the notices, that are required to be posted, again, asking the question of whether if those notices are posted in various languages. If they're not, then they should. And also, are there notices sent out to community when the grading and the construction is happening to ensure that community members are not outdoors, right? Breathing in this air. If that's not actively happening, then that should be considered a requirement, I would say, but also, you can add it as a mitigation measure. And as I mentioned, related to the housing condition issues, providing air filtration systems for residents to ensure that the outdoor air quality is not coming in is really important. It could be listed as a mitigation measure along with funding to rehabilitate these homes as well.
I to go back and thinking about here of this, the kind of, so you mentioned Devon, communication as being one thing that could be improved here too. And so I'm thinking about the kind of notices is one way of communicating in different languages is being important for people. I'm wondering if you could say more about what you think and your organization thinks about the kind of ways in which like local community input or communication or how that communication, other sorts of things that you advocate for in these kinds of scenarios of being able to communicate with people who are affected or just understanding more what's happening in their communities.
Sure, yeah. So I think, Devon, as you were listing the process, conversations with community was somewhere towards the end of the process. And I think it needs to be shifted towards the beginning of the process, right? Having those consultation workshops, community meetings with residents at the very, very start of the projects. And then also ensuring that the information is accessible. I know that EIRs are posted online. I know that notices to to public hearings are posted online. But these are very large documents that, unless you really have the time and you can, read, and assuming that you can read and read English, you probably are not accessing this information. And so that's why we do engage in a lot of door-to-door knocking conversations with residents to ensure that residents have access to this information in their palm of their hands, right? It doesn't require residents to go into a website to get this information. And then also just being very transparent about what the impacts will be. I think a lot of times when projects are discussed, it always focuses on the benefit of more jobs, which more jobs is great, right? We always want more jobs, but I think we have to really move away from that dichotomy, I guess you can say, of more jobs versus my health, right? Like it's not okay. And we really definitely need to ensure that the community's health is prioritized and not the revenue. Again, it's just so important to think about community first.
Great. Okay, so we have a question. I need to get to questions. We have a couple here on Zoom. So this one is from Michael Alt. And so Michael writes here, thank you for this panel. And this is for you, Devon. So what role does the California Public Utilities Commission play in your operation? And then relatedly, where does the produced power actually go, locally or to other parts of the state?
CPC, I think in our like daily operations, the CPC has very little impact. The CPC is assisting with overall statewide planning. And so when it comes to project-specific siting, design, operations, they have very little impact. And when it comes to the power that we generate, they go onto the California grid. And so it essentially supports the grid. We will need to get an off-taker to that energy. Typically, there are projects that will operate merchant and essentially just sell energy on a daily basis. But just due to the size of the investment that most of these projects take, you usually want to get some type of long-term power purchase agreement with an off-taker. And that power purchase agreement can be with any entity on that grid. So often, you may hear of someone, I think you might have mentioned it, like in Boron, their off-taker was Silicon Valley, Monterey Bay. So they're buying that power. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that those electrons are going all the way up to Monterey Bay. The electrons are probably staying on the grid closer to that area, but it all kind of goes into a bucket and everybody buys out of that bucket. And then that's how the grid kind of operates all together. So it's a little bit confusing like that sometimes because people think, oh yeah, you're shipping that energy all the way over there. It's actually, we're all pulling from the same grid system. We all need this power to support that grid that supports us.
I can take another question here, unless we've got another one in audience here. So this one's from Cassandra Lopez, also for you, Devon, popular person here. So what lessons had to be learned with the development of the Bullhead project is what her question is. And I think overall, as you were doing, or perhaps as you've done more projects, what kinds of lessons is your organization had to learn?
Yeah, I mean, we continue to learn lessons as we go. This is still an evolving industry. Even tonight I'm learning some stuff about valley fever, and that's continued to be an issue that we monitor very closely and are trying to always implement the best practices that we can. One of the unique things that we had to deal with on Bullhead is that we actually sited the land on already disturbed land, and we thought, hey, this is a really great place for us to put this project. It's not going to run into issues of like mini Joshua tree or native desert. And then after we started advancing the project, we realized that there was a stand of trees on the site that was host to a Swainson's hawk nest. And so we started having to figure out like, well, how are we going to build this project and not impact the Swainson's hawk? And we spent a lot of time working with some biologists that are specialists with the Swainson's hawk. We coordinated very closely with National Audubon, and we developed essentially a conservation approach to the Swainson's hawk that would allow them to continue to be on the site. And then also mitigate for potential foraging habitat, not only for that hawk, but also other hawk in the valley, which is something that a lot of the prior projects haven't been doing. So we've been progressively increasing our approach to addressing Swainson's hawk in the Antelope Valley with the hopes of being able to sustain a population there. So that was one really interesting thing that came out of Bullhead. But there's probably dozens of others as we continue to improve our knowledge of how we build projects, how we integrate with the environment. Even like just the grading techniques that I mentioned, that's been something that's been evolving, and like the open fence design is something that's relatively new as well. So all these different things are different things that we're continuing to learn on.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Lauer, I have a question. I mean, you had mentioned in your presentation of thinking about, getting solar for your own house and thinking about solar, and we're thinking about energy. I mean, is one of many options, and they're all going to have some type of environmental impact of thinking about that. And I'm wondering what you think maybe in that question of before of if there's ways of doing this, that mitigating environmental impacts, or do you think ultimately that the kind of impacts in the desert are just too hard to overcome, and that we shouldn't be doing large scale solar in the desert?
Well, the Mojave Desert is a biodiversity hotspot unique on our planet. So we should not completely convert it to a renewable energy. facility, right? So at least at some point we have to say, okay, such and such a percentage should not be touched, and that should include the pristine desert environment left. And you also have to make sure that if you have like a scattered environment, you know, if you want to support species there, you have to make sure that there are wildlife corridors, that not there's one huge farm, there's another huge farm, and a population of, let's say, kid foxes here cannot reach the kid foxes there, or they are in danger to be run over. So you have to make sure that wildlife can sustain itself genetically, having a healthy population. That is important too. And asking me about going solar, and what I always think is, like, if you're really concerned about the environment, there are so many other things that you can do before you maybe go solar or buy an electric car, because that's not really environmentally friendly when you think about it. You should first think about saving energy, because a lot is wasted. A lot of other things is wasted here in the United States too, like food waste. You know, we have to first look into how we can save energy. And then with the electric car, when you think about it, well, this is now vogue and a boom. You see all these Tesla cars driving around. But is it really sustainable to buy a solar car dead? Well, there was once the development of a solar car. But electric car, yeah, it helps to keep the air clean in the city. But overall, the resources to build those electric cars are also like questionable. Where's all this lithium coming from? You know, how much energy does it cost to make those cars? Maybe it's better to think about slowing down a little bit and take the bus, or maybe in the spring, take the bike. But, you know, with our lifestyle, it's really hard to do that. You cannot sell that. If I suggest this to students, but what can I do? Maybe you can take the bus, but Dr. Lauer, you know, then I will be late for your classes. I will not be able to do this and this and this. It's not practicable anymore. It's really difficult. It's maybe something for people who are retired, right? But people who are active, it's really, really hard to be environmentally friendly. It's difficult. So the best solution, I don't know. But what I
Yeah.
definitely wanna say, we have to work together and not be enemies to maybe make some changes. And often it is like that there's aggression in the communication. Are you doing that? You haven't looked at this, blah, blah. And then you don't want to talk to each other anymore because you offended each other. This is awful, because then you're not reaching anything. And this status has been reached to some part with the Kern County Board of Supervisors and some people with the city of Bakersfield. It's difficult to communicate with them because they don't see the value of biodiversity. They only see the dollars. And they maybe have great ideas for how they want to spend those dollars, but they're lacking some education. And then if you never got educated on what is biodiversity worth, then you cannot really find common ground. It's really hard to find common ground. It's good that you said you come from environmental consulting. You're the perfect person to actually really work for an environmental company here, like EDF. But there are others who completely are not well-rounded, educated people that can make good decisions that are sustainable. That's what I mean. So we have to work together. Otherwise, no good will be reached, right? But it's difficult.
I think so. And I have a sort of similar question to you. I mean, I teach a environmental philosophy class, and we talk about environmental justice. Oftentimes you have so many examples, it's environmental injustice, and you can think about of all the situations where it's not achieving what we want to achieve. And then you think about, well, are there ways of doing these things and establish the kind of principles that we want, and thinking about how we meet energy needs that we have. And I think for your organization too, I mean, like thinking about solar as and what a kind of way that would kind of meet the principles. I mean, you've already talked about this some, but it's not that there's in principle opposition to doing these sort of things, but if you could say perhaps that, you know, I don't know, because I mean, there are other alternatives to energy as well that perhaps pose more problems, or I don't know if that's your overall stance of what you would say for this, for large scale solar.
I'm
Yeah.
understanding your question to be, what's our position? on
Yes,
large scale?
yes.
Yeah, so I think again,
That was a much more efficient way of saying the question.
No, totally. I just want to make sure.
Yes.
I think it starts off again with having the conversation with residents to ensure that that is something that residents are prioritizing, right? I bring it back to community because I mean, again, like they're the ones who know their community and they're experts in their community, and only they will know whether or not the type of a solar project can impact their community or adversely impact their community. So, I think again, talking to folks first, but to Dr. Lauer's point, and to our audience members here, the investment should really be focused on improving public transportation infrastructure, right? And reducing emissions. I think one of the major issues with energy projects, not necessarily solar, is just again that these projects are supposed to reduce emissions and they're carbon negative and all these things, but are they really helping meet our climate goals, right? When there are air quality impacts associated with the operation and, with the construction and operation of these projects. And even if like large energy projects are including solar to mitigate or offset some of these emissions, the contaminants are still reaching residents who are breathing in these contaminants. And so I didn't really answer your question, I don't think, but I think it comes down again to community and ensuring that community is able to decide whether or not these projects should come into their homes.
Great. No, thank you. That was great. So we're kind of getting to the end of the event tonight. I want to give each panelist a chance to final things that you want to say, or one kind of final question to each. So both, if there's other things you want to address, but at an event like this, people are always thinking about, well, what are kind of next steps? Or if I want to get more involved or learn more about this topic, or if there's things I want to do to become more active and thinking about how to. So I wonder if each of you could, if there's other things you'd like to address, or if there's things you could say, if people want to learn more or next steps that they should take. Devon, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So, well, if you want to get more involved, I have my contact information in there. So if you want to contact me and ask me more questions or give me any more ideas of how we can improve our projects, I'm definitely open to that. That contact information was on the slides. And I would also encourage folks to definitely participate in their local planning processes. Make sure that your voice is heard through there. Make sure that you're talking to your officials about what you feel they should be doing better, and also where revenue should be spent on the community and where the communities need that support. That's something that we're always often advocating for as well. In fact, right now, one of the things that we're doing is we're advocating at the federal level that the rents that come through on federal lands actually get distributed down to the communities as well. And so it's something that helps us as developers, and something that we want to see the communities getting a benefit from also. And I think just kind of adding on to my closing thoughts on the panel, just again, I really appreciate the comments that were raised here tonight. And it's just a good reminder that we need to continue having the conversation, continue engaging, and continue informing, and continue to be willing to listen. So I really appreciate your thoughts, and I'm looking forward to the continued conversation.
Dr. Lauer.
So for some of your new projects, do you want me to come and check the soil for validity?
I'm actually very interested in learning more about that. So
Okay.
let's talk afterwards.
Okay, yeah, good. So, and then I also want to say, this is actually a good point to talk to the officials. We actually today is a city council meeting, and we sent 4 students to speak up about the Kern River and the inactivity of the city of Bakersfield to pursue what Judge Pulskamp has ordered, that 40% of the water has to be in the river. It should be monitored by the city. The city is not doing it. And when you go to the city council, you have 2 minutes to speak. So we motivated some students to go to the council meeting today and speak up. Hopefully they will report tomorrow to me that they were successful. But this is really an important point, and not many people actually are having the time or think it's important to speak up, because they are elected leaders who should lead our community in the right direction, right? Being well educated, have advisors, and decide the right thing. But often they are lobbied by some other groups, and sometimes things are being done, completed, and you have no clue that this is even happening in your community until everything is already decided. And then you cannot raise your voice anymore. Or you can have a lawsuit. That's the last resort. And that's also kind of costly, and communities have not the money to do that.
So just want to credit a lot of what I mentioned today to my colleagues and to the residents who share their concerns and their recommendations, which I stated today. But I also, again, want to remind and reiterate for the, I don't know, 100th time maybe, to engage with community. If project proponents are going to community to build large scale solar or hydrogen or whatever energy projects they want to do, really the expectation is that you go to community to talk to them, not that community should go to public settings to voice their concerns. That is also important and a reason why we mobilize residents to engage in public decision making processes. But oftentimes the burden is on community to do that, right? Rather than the project proponents going into the community to share their the impacts and and obtain their recommendations. And then one last thing to mention that I thought was important and tied to Dr. Lauer's work is conducting health risk assessments, which are often not conducted for projects. And that's a huge issue. I think based on my experience, health risk assessments are only done whenever there's certainty that the air quality impacts are not going to meet the air quality standards. And really, you should be doing that regardless. Let's ensure that residents' health is being protected.
Great. Thank you so much to panelists and you all for attending tonight. And please give our panelists another round of applause here. Hope many of you can attend the CRC symposium on Friday. Remember the sustainability symposium coming up a couple weeks. We have information about upcoming Kegley Institute events out there too. So thank you for coming and have a good night.